Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the most incredible and honestly unexpected transformations in all of American literary history. We're talking about Walt Whitman. But, not just Whitman, the famous poet. We're zeroing in on Walt Whitman during the American Civil War. We'll be looking at the crucible of war and the profound price of empathy. Let's get right into it.
So here's the big question that's going to anchor our entire exploration today. How did America's most controversial poet become its greatest nurse? Now, before the war, Whitman was this bohemian author of Leaves of Grass. That was a collection of free verse poetry that completely shocked 1855 America with its, let's say, earthy sensuality. He was known as a rabble-rouser, a really sharp observer of city life, but the Civil War was about to completely shatter his world and redefine his legacy forever.
And this really illustrates how it all started. Beat, beat, drums. When the war first broke out, Whitman wrote this poem as this incredibly urgent, patriotic rally call for the Union. He was totally swept up in the initial, chaotic enthusiasm that just gripped the entire nation. It was loud, it was defiant, and, from a safe distance, the war actually seemed like a grand crusade. But that safe distance was about to vanish in the absolute blink of an eye.
Section 1. The Call to the Front. A brother's name in the casualty list.
Okay, so picture this. It's December 16th, 1862. Whitman is just reading the New York Tribune when he sees a name in the casualty list that literally freezes his blood. First Lieutenant G.W. Whitmore. He immediately panicked, terrified that it was his brother, George, who had joined the 51st New York Infantry Regiment. Whitman rushed south to the battlefront in Virginia. And making matters worse, on the way down his wallet was stolen. It left him totally destitute. He actually wrote about this frantic search later, saying he was walking all day and night, unable to ride, trying to get information. It was just a desperate, panicked journey to the front lines. But thankfully, against all odds, he eventually found George alive, having suffered only a really superficial cheek wound. But while he was searching for George, Whitman experienced a profound psychological pivot. He didn't just see a few injured men. He witnessed thousands of wounded soldiers in the absolute grisly aftermath of battle. And most shockingly, he saw literal heaps of amputated limbs stacked outside the field hospitals. Seeing these broken bodies fundamentally shifted his life's trajectory. He realized right then and there he couldn't just go back to his comfortable life in New York. So on December 28, 1862, he left for Washington, D.C. with a singular, unwavering mission: to help.
Which brings us to Section 2, Nursing the Great Army. From bohemian poet to devoted healer. Whitman completely restructured his entire life just to serve others. With a friend's help, he secured a part-time job in the Army Paymaster's office. Now, why part-time? Well, because he specifically needed his days and evenings free so he could volunteer countless hours as a nurse in the blood-soaked hospital tents of Washington. He literally sat with the dying. He wrote letters home for the wounded and brought whatever comfort he humanly could to these broken young men. And during all this, he was actively processing his intense emotional response through his writing. He published the essay The Great Army of the Sick in 1863 and was just constantly gathering these harrowing notes that would eventually become his book, Memoranda During the War. But the war didn't just stay in those hospital wards. Section 3. A Family's Heavy Toll. The Compounding Tragedies of 1864. So, while Whitman is absorbing the mass trauma of literally thousands of sick and wounded soldiers, his own family back home was completely collapsing. In a span of just a few mere months, the emotional crush was devastating. In September 1864, his brother George, the exact same brother he had frantically searched for earlier, was captured by Confederate forces. Then on December 3rd, his brother Andrew died of tuberculosis, which was tragically compounded by alcoholism. And later that exact same month, Whitman actually had to commit his brother Jesse to the Kings County Lunatic Asylum. It's just an immense, almost unimaginable personal burden he carried, all while still showing up every single day to heal others. Despite the absolute darkness of 1864, the new year seemed to offer a tiny ray of hope. $1,200. That was the yearly salary Whitman finally secured in January 1865 for a low-grade clerk job at the Bureau of Indian Affairs. For him, it was a solid, desperately needed income. But man, this relief was incredibly short-lived. By June, the new Secretary of the Interior, James Harlan, found an 1860 edition of Whitman's controversial poetry collection, Leaves of Grass, just sitting in Whitman's desk. Deeming the sensual poetry obscene, Harlan fired Whitman right on the spot on moral grounds.
But here's the thing. Despite being fired over his morals, Whitman embodied a concept that defined his next role: radical empathy. That's the ability to deeply understand and share the feelings of others, completely transcending deep political or personal divides. After he was fired, Whitman's friends actually protested and managed to get him transferred to the Attorney General's office. And part of his new job? Interviewing former Confederate soldiers who were seeking presidential pardons. Now, really think about this for a second. He is interviewing the very men who had been shooting at the Union soldiers he just spent years nursing. Yet Whitman approached them impartially, with genuine fascination and just absolute radical empathy. He wrote, "There are real characters among them, and you know I have a fancy for anything out of the ordinary." He just listened to their stories as fellow human beings.
This immense capacity for feeling leads us to Section 4, Elegies for Abraham Lincoln, National Catharsis Through Poetry. Just as the war was finally ending, the nation suffered an unimaginable heartbreak: the assassination of President Lincoln, a man Whitman deeply, deeply admired. To process this massive national grief, Whitman authored several poems, but two really stand out in stark contrast. First, there's "O Captain, My Captain." Now, this used a very conventional rhyming structure. It became massively popular and was actually the only poem widely anthologized during his lifetime. But then, there was "When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed." This was a return to his roots. It's a complex, deeply symbolic, free verse masterpiece. It didn't just mourn a single man, it mourned the massive loss of life across the entire country, using nature to process profound emotional grief. It truly remains one of the most beautiful elegies ever written.
When we take a step back, we can see this incredibly clear progression in Whitman's Civil War experience. First, physically tending to the broken bodies of soldiers in the wards. Then, psychologically processing immense personal and national grief. And finally, healing a fractured nation through enduring, empathetic poetry. This theme of healing just weaves through his entire journey from 1862 onward. He wasn't just a poet writing from the sidelines. He was in the physical and emotional trenches, using his art and his own two hands to stitch the country and himself back together.
Which leaves us with this final, really provocative question to consider. How did Whitman's firsthand exposure to mass death fundamentally reshape American literature? Think about it. The bohemian poet who started by shocking readers with his sensuality transformed into the great nurse who held the hands of the dying. Think about the ultimate price of that empathy. Witnessing such unparalleled horror birthed a radical compassion that ultimately produced some of the most profound, healing poetry in world history. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep exploring, stay curious, and I'll see you next time.